let's talk to Alan Tolhurst now. Let's talk about some of the stories we've already touched on in terms of two-tier sentencing, which has really irritated me, and it looks by the text and the phone calls that we're taking that it's irritated you too. And also, my war on France. Alan, what do you think about my suggestion that we go to war with France over their attitude? They're sticking two fingers up at us with regard to them not helping us at all, as they were contracted to do so by way of preventing illegal migration from boats. What do you think of my suggestion?
Well, as someone who holds dual British and French nationality, I think I would probably stay fairly neutral in Russell's war against France,
Alan?
I'm afraid.
And I should have seen, on my sheet here, it says Alain, not Alan, and I should have tumbled, shouldn't I? I wish you were in the studio. I'd have an arm wrestle with you right now.
Yeah, it sounds good. It sounds like the best way to sort of deal with these issues. No, I think it's really interesting, and actually, it kind of plays into some. I've spoken to Home Office ministers in previous administrations in Tory governments who've always felt that perhaps the French were not as helpful as perhaps they would often suggest. That actually, that every few months the Home Secretary or the Immigration Minister would sign this agreement on kind of more funding or more kind of like sharing of intelligence and work with police to try and prevent boats crossing. But they always kind of felt a little bit like they weren't really able to get enough kind of support, and obviously those boats were unable to to stop those boats from being crossed. And so obviously we're still seeing now.
Well, we could, but we just choose not to, right?
Right, and I think there's the rhetoric was often tough about how tough they were going to be, but obviously we continue to see those boats cross across the channel and continue to do so, and so I can understand why continues to be some frustration in the Home Office with the French and not being able to tackle some of these problems.
So Alain, and I will say Alain now, not Alan, whose side are you on if you really had to pick a side?
Well, as a journalist, I will maintain some neutrality in all matters, I'm afraid. I'm going to give you one of those answers.
Why? Have an opinion. That's what this channel is all about, opinion.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, obviously, clearly, the impact, obviously, the continued illegal migration is having both on France, obviously, and the UK, obviously, it is not a good thing, and there needs to be a way of kind of tackling this in the long term. As I say, there's always been really kind of strong rhetoric, and as we're seeing from kind of stop the boats to smash the gangs, but obviously it's not really working. We're still seeing large numbers coming across, and the kind of the impact that's been having on failing to tackle with it at kind of both ends. And I think that there has to be some better cooperation. I think post-Brexit, obviously, we saw breaking down relationships with Europe, but obviously there would still need to be a strong security relationship beyond kind of the migrant problem elsewhere as well. Yeah. And I think that there needs to be better cooperation, I think, rather than kind of continued antagonistic. And I would be
I think we should start by asking for our £500 million back, or as Stephen Wolfe was saying earlier on, it's actually £2 billion now since 2014. And did you see, related to this story, The Sun, brilliant expose today, so if you haven't seen it, go out and grab a copy of The Sun. The fact that they've kind of travelled with these migrants and have been told by the migrants that they were offered VIP upgrades on their boat. So extra legroom, I kid you not, extra legroom for a few more quid. And I joked earlier, maybe an in-boat meal, maybe a movie, Titanic or something, perhaps. I mean, that is absolutely ludicrous, isn't it, in terms of how we are being played by the smugglers, by the French, by the British government, and by everybody, it seems.
Oh yeah, sounds more enjoyable than my last Ryanair flight, to be honest. But no, I think I think you're right, and clearly, there's this kind of, there's rhetoric about smashing the gangs. Obviously, we have seen lots of arrests and kind of continued prosecution, but we know that while people continue to think that they are able to make it to the UK and continue to enjoy what they think is a kind of a generous system in the UK, I think there's lots of debate about whether it really is, but clearly there is that belief amongst people who are travelling from places to the UK that it would be a generous place to go.
Migrants are calling it, Alan. Migrants are calling infinitely generous, and that we are kind and we are tolerant, and that we are the only country to get to on the basis that we are so soft and generous versus France, Italy, Germany, all of the other places that these migrants could kind of end up. So surely the answer to this, and we spent the last hour or so talking to people about what the solution might be to this, it's simply just to take those incentives away, isn't it? The 46 quid a week in cash, and the free house and the free health care, and the driving lessons that we hear that some councils in their wisdom are providing to asylum seekers. I mean, whatever next. Surely that's just the answer, isn't it?
Well, I think one of the issues that I've dealt with a lot with dealing with these kind of stories is that, when people come to the UK, they're not able to, while they're still waiting for their decision on asylum or their visa to be made, they're not able to get a national insurance card and therefore work legally. So therefore, the state is beholden to kind of help them out in terms of obviously places to live and obviously money to live on. And the fact is that would kind of make sense if people were only waiting a few weeks for their decision, but often people are waiting months and months. So therefore, that bill kind of continues to rack up. And there's those things you talked about, kind of driving lessons and all that kind of stuff. Clearly, obviously, that is about trying to integration. If someone is coming to this country, wants to be able to make them so they stay and to be productive when they're here. Obviously, I guess, given obviously the constrained financial stuff, it does seem as though that's when people start to feel kind of antagonistic and feel that though people are kind of, jumping the queue or getting benefits that they would not be able to access as a UK national. And I think that's understandable. People do kind of feel that way. But at the same time, we do want people who come to this country for the right reasons to be able
people
to
that can contribute. Yes, absolutely. And I don't think there's any sane argument that suggests that there should be no immigration to this country, but it should be at our choosing, and it should be people that contribute. Talking about people that contribute, or not, as the case may be politically, Angela Rayner, story today, which is the irony of this, Alan, the irony. Angela Rayner's staff are going to go on strike because the head of the department, it seems, whether it's her or the permanent secretary, has demanded that shock horror, that they should return to the office to do some work.
Yeah, it's interesting, obviously, that she's in charge of bringing in kind of probably the most kind of generous set of kind of workers' rights.
The Workers' Rights Act, yeah.
Yeah, completely. And obviously some of that is being utilised against her own department, who are pushing back against this kind of mandate to return to the office. The story is it's not simply about returning to the office. It's the fact that this department her department has more kind of offices outside of Whitehall, outside of London, than most departments. And actually there's an issue where they're closing some offices and opening some others. And so it's about where...
Because it's the Department of Communities, Housing and Local Government. So exactly. By very definition, obviously, because the housing brief is so regional, I suppose, so spread as is, of course, communities, yes, it's a bit fragmented.
Exactly. And so it's not simply about whether they're getting all kind of civil servants into their desk in Whitehall. It's about kind of where they're moving to around the country. And obviously that is an issue that lots of companies have in terms of trying to get people where they kind of work. And so there clearly is this kind of issue. But yeah, I mean, it would be quite ironic if they're unable to push through what they want to do because of laws they have themselves pushing through. But,
ironic and hilarious, I think, that Angela Rayner, the architect of the Workers' Rights Act, which actually has, by the way, at its core, people's right, inverted commas, to choose pretty much where they work. They can work from home, they can work from the beach, do whatever they want, no matter how unproductive that is. Her own staff have been called in, which is kind of in deference to that new act, but are going to go on strike as a consequence of that diktat. I mean, I'm all for flexibility and giving people a bit of trust, but at the same time, if you've signed an employment contract years ago that says that you will work in Whitehall 9 to 5, 5 days a week, then do you know what? You've signed up to it. That's what you've got to do.
Yeah, thankfully Angela Rayner seems like she's the sort of person that could take a joke on this. If it does, she'll probably see the funny side of it. But yeah, you're right. It does. These are kind of struggles that lots of companies.
Alan, she just doesn't care.
No. I know, but lots of companies are kind of facing this, and it is really interesting to see that kind of at the sharp end of it, the government itself having to face this stuff, because there are other departments as well. The Treasury has set up this campus up in Darlington. There's lots of issue about which people are going to go up and work there, which kind of continue to want to work from home, or what kind of work from the area rather than being kind of down in London. And it's it's a microcosm of what the country is facing in general, and there is this kind of backlash against the kind of hybrid working from home model that obviously came in with the pandemic. And I think it is really interesting to see whether these kind of reforms, what that leads to. Obviously the government has had this massive push for increased productivity. Is this going to lead to increased productivity? There are lots of studies that say that allowing people that flexibility does work. Obviously lots of people would think that working from home is often kind of skiving from home.
All of the studies I've seen show that it's more productive to actually be kind of supervised, semi-supervised within an office work environment. That's where cultures get bred, because you can't really breed a culture when people are working at home. But of course the other consideration here is that this is against a backdrop of a spring statement where Rachel Reeves, our hapless Chancellor, said that she wants to save up to £5 billion in the civil service with a voluntary redundancy scheme. They're very, very lucky, this lot, actually, Angela Rayner's department, that it doesn't become a compulsory redundancy scheme, because if I was in charge, it would be, because I think you can cut the civil service by about 100,000 people from the current 520,000. So they're playing a dangerous game here, I think, Angela Rayner's staff, on the basis that if they push it too far, they might just get sacked.
Well, I think they know at the moment how difficult it is actually to force people out of the civil service. That's one of the big things people within the civil service say themselves. Is the massive problem is that's the problem is that the systems in place for managing people out are actually really difficult. That you get basically there's no way kind of unless it's kind of for sort of gross misconduct. It's very hard to push people out. They end up on this kind of 6-month performance review system, and at the end of it, then they can be forced out. But I was speaking to someone who worked in the civil service saying that what you can do is that sort of halfway through that period, if you then see an uptick in your performance, it effectively kind of resets the clock on that 6 months. So it can take an awfully long time to push people out.
That's modern liberal fluff, and I know it's not you setting those rules. You're just explaining what the rules are.
No, but I think that's what. But
what I would do.
Saying this is not. It's not a system that people within the civil service think is a good thing.
No, Alan. Do you know what I would do, and what would happen in the private sector? I would go to the person holding the checkbook, so the chief financial officer or the treasury in the case of the public sector, and I would say, how much is it going to cost me to sack 100,000 people on Monday? And obviously, I'm going to choose those that are useless, those that refuse to come in, those that are renegades, those that also refuse to take instruction from ministers, and of course, look, there will be an unfair dismissal tribunal process, but that has a maximum, of whatever it is, 50, 60,000 pounds. I would calculate that, put that to one side, and on Monday sack them. I mean, I'm serious. That's what we need to do. We've got to stop pussyfooting around with these people that effectively are destroying the public sector, destroying our strength and productivity, and it is the tail wagging the dog. These civil service employees should just do as they're damn well told.
I think the problem with that is obviously, as you rightly point out, it would be pretty costly in terms of how much it would cost to do. Obviously, it would be an upfront cost. You would have savings kind of later on with a smaller civil service. The problem then is also that the government relies on the civil service, on public servants to enact their policies and to deliver what they want to do. And obviously, they want to kind of build trust that some was eroded during the previous Conservative government. I don't necessarily think that coming in and just sacking 100,000 people would necessarily engender the sort of trust that the government is looking for with Whitehall.
Save a load of money.
That is also kind of the problem.
And so we've only got a couple of minutes left. Let's move on to something else that I want to talk to you about. In fact, two other things that are kind of distantly related. One is a new prison opened this week, which the Labour Party, of course, are taking credit for. Who knew that you could conceive, get planning permission and build a prison in 9 months? Guess what? It's because it was conceived by the previous Conservative government. 1,500 places. It was opened yesterday by the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood. But only 1,500 places, and because of that very, very tiny contribution to our 85,000 prison space pool of availability, we now have news that back to where we were a few months ago, the government are now considering the early release of dangerous criminals. Once again, do you remember that they did this back in the summer? Because there aren't enough prison places, because we're now at 99% capacity. What is it about building loads more prisons that politicians don't understand?
And as you say, this new one, which while welcome, barely touches the sides and will not help with that overall number. And there have been, over the last sort of 20, 30 years especially, there has been a really, really kind of a complete slowdown of building because there was just, they didn't want to spend the money on it. But it's such a false economy because you're now leading to this point where you're having to take really kind of drastic, draconian, remedial measures. And, we kind of saw this coming a few months ago when, as you say, the first kind of set of early release schemes were in place. It was saying, well, this is all very well and good now, but in a few months you're going to have to go back to the well and start to do all over again, and at some point you're going to run out of those people who are on the shorter sentences, and you're going to end up with the people who are on the longer sentences, who therefore by their very nature are going to have been convicted of much more serious violent crimes.
And let's be clear that they are a danger to the public. That's what prison is for. Prison is not just about rehabilitation and fluffy liberal nonsense. It's also about protecting people from criminals. It's also about punishment. No television cells, no PlayStations, no open prisons where you can get a takeaway delivered by delivery on a Saturday night. That's a real thing, by the way. I mean, we need to start being tough. But what we shouldn't be doing is using the lack of prison resources in terms of places as an excuse to let dangerous people out to re-offend, because guess what? A large percentage of them do. Talking of which, the final thing I wanted to talk to you about, Alan, is this prolific shoplifter that has been caught again. 4 counts of shoplifting, goes to court. The sum total of £19,000 worth of goods stolen. And again, as I said earlier on in the show, not bread, not cheese, not tins of baked beans to feed a family of 3 or 4 on hard times. This is Nike shoes, this is kind of, Gap jeans, this is iPhones, this is expensive stuff that then gets sold, presumably to fuel a lifestyle, maybe other things, but gets to court and the judge decides not to incarcerate this individual, even though this individual has been prosecuted and imprisoned for shoplifting before, because, drum roll, shock horror, they played the mental health card.
Yeah, I mean, look, clearly someone who has this kind of impulse may have, kleptomania or something like that. But the whole point
is
about
that really a thing? That's
system,
just someone that wants to nick stuff, isn't it?
Well, yeah, potentially so. But my point is more that, like, if you believe that this person, has a mental illness, but they still obviously committed these crimes, as you say, pretty serious amounts of shoplifting. The whole point of the justice system is, as you say, the punishment, but also rehabilitation. If this person does have a mental illness, then you should be able to sentence them in a way that means that they get the help to be able to prevent them from doing this, because clearly it is an impulse, because they've done it many times.
Well, surely then the answer is
no one will stop them from doing it.
If they are a criminal, and bearing in mind there are victims here, right? There's rarely such thing as a victimless crime. This, by the way, Melissa Grant is her name, 55 years old, appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court yesterday, charged with those 4 counts of theft from Selfridges. So again, this is not, Poundland. This is not Tesco. She's nicking stuff from Selfridges at, very expensive stuff. Melissa Grant, part of a gang that was dubbed the Spice Girls. They're so prolific. They've got a nickname. So she doesn't have mental health issues such that she can't find a way to Selfridges and to the shoe department and the expensive boutique clothes department. But this judge, whoever it is, I don't think the judge is named here, unfortunately. The prosecutors are, but not the judge. Yes, lets her off. So I would suggest if she has a serious mental health issue such that she's a criminal, that maybe she's just locked up in a secure mental health facility. That would be the answer, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, clearly, as you say, she's been in prison before, and that's not prevented her from reoffending. So clearly, something else does need to be done. I'm not necessarily whether she needs to be kind of locked up for her and kind of in that sense, but
for
necessarily,
our safety, not hers. I don't think shopkeepers should have to put prices up to the public because they're getting loads of their stuff nicked every week.
Yeah, and obviously shoplifting has become a kind of real salient issue because everyone does feel as though it's just not being dealt with correctly. Like, it's not being policed in a way that gives anyone any confidence that it's going to be dealt with. And people think that essentially it's kind of a free for all, especially if you steal kind of small amounts. It's obviously women went a lot beyond that, but clearly I think people are going to read this and be emboldened and think that even if you shoplift large amounts, you're still not going to be incarcerated. So it doesn't really send out the right message, given that we know how much of a problem shoplifting continues to be at this moment.
And again, look, on the mental health side, she was compass mentis enough to understand the value of 4 Optica shirts valued at £2,800, 2 designer bags that were worth a total of £4,700. So, she seems to be of presence of mind enough not to be nicking stuff that's too cheap. 5 Castley shirts to the value of £6,000, a £1,800 medium logo bag, and a £325 oblique Bylon cap. Wow, sorry, a baseball cap for £325. Wow. And an Alalia dress, whatever that is, for £2,650. So she's definitely got good judgment as a shoplifter, isn't she?
Yeah, look, and I don't want to come off as kind of a bleeding heart liberal. I've not seen kind of the kind of reports that were clearly done for the prosecution when they led them to this decision not to prosecute in this way. So I don't really know what this woman's kind of state of mind is, or what the kind of rest of her life looks like.
Her state of mind is criminal, I think.
Right, but yeah, clearly, beyond that there has to be something that can be done, because if nothing is done, this woman who obviously has a history of shoplifting will continue to do so. Yeah, so I do think I might just get looked at again.
It's very, very much a question of we're looking after the perpetrators more than we're looking after the victims, and that is Britain in 2025, Alan, isn't it? So I'll say au revoir and merci beaucoup. And
well, look, if I'm in the news building any time, we'll get that arm wrestle done.
Let's get that arm wrestle done. We must record it, and we'll assume that whoever wins, that's Britain versus France. And if you win, my friend, I'll stop calling for a war on France to stop the migrants. Alan, thank you very much indeed. It's been fun. Cheers. Many thanks indeed.